Hey, it's RemanX here, and we're going to go back to basics with ISOs and teach you how to theory craft on your own. It's time. So let's go back into some of the things that I think are misconceptions about the way that the ISO works. So we're going to talk about the ISO state, which is vulnerable. And so we're going to have to explore vulnerable in a way that I think will hopefully make sense. And if not, you guys can ask me in the comments. I promise I'll reply as much as possible to help clear up some of the misconceptions here. But let's get into it right now. So vulnerable is a flat 10% bonus. So it's additive. So if you have a target with defense down, it's an additional 10% damage. Defense down to 50% damage. So it is one of the most powerful abilities that ISO has introduced to the game. So the 10% raw damage just from the marked, aka vulnerable status, is the way that this actually works. And you'll know that the target is marked with a purple crosshairs that appears over your target. And that means they're taking 10% more damage from all sources, regardless if the character has ISO equipped or not. So that is something that people are like, well, wait a minute. No, I need Striker to take advantage of it. No, every character interaction, whether they not or not they have ISO equipped, will do more damage to that target. So you're going to see that we're going to go into some of these different classes, talk about why you might select these, and more importantly, what classes you should choose, and how we came to our own conclusions about what to do here. So we're going to start with Skirmisher, because Skirmisher is your number one reliable marking for targets, because it will happen every single time the character has an attack that interacts with the opponent. So we'll talk about characters that can provide, Skirmisher that were surprising to us. So early on, Ebony Maw, with the fact that he was applying offense down and defense down, even though there was no damage calculation, because it actually attacked the character and did a hard check versus their focus or their resistance, it was applying vulnerable. So that was why for us it was an instant Skirmisher, because every single attack he had would apply that buff, so allow other characters to take advantage of it from damage perspective. So the other thing about it is a very unique thing they added later on was at level 5, it was adding more focus. So what that does is allow for characters that are struggling to maybe punch up or apply debuffs. It allows them to do so with a nice increase in stats. So it's not, remember, it's not a flat 30% boost. It's based off the base stats. And we'll show you that in a moment here when we go through some of these. So the next one I want to talk about is probably, and by the way, you'll see that on Scream in particular, we were testing a ton of these. I spent a lot of ions doing some advanced testing, trying to figure out how this interaction was working. So we're going to talk about Fortifier. So Fortifier, to me, was probably one of the most disappointing. And so it wind up with the least amount of usage. Areas where it's good is if you want to give a character a little more survivability in early burst modes, or early on, if you're a newer player starting out. This 10,000 is a huge bonus to throw on some characters and can really change some early game interactions. But beyond that 3% and then 7% total, we did take it through the raid, and this is a very fast character, and it wasn't giving her enough of a benefit. She was still dying, and this is at U7.5. There was still too much damage coming at her for her to survive. So we moved away from it. And so some of the other characters that we thought would benefit from it, like Strife. The reality was Strife was already providing so much of his own barrier that it was wasted on him. Some characters that we thought about it, we really just found that either it was wasted when we rather have them do more damage or provide healing because of their health pool. Would make them a better healer. So very few characters wound up with this. Some of the characters that I think probably stick in my mind the most are putting this barrier on characters in the power armor, specifically like Ironheart and Rescue, who you need to do non-attack abilities. You're relying on staying alive to make sure their execution gets done. So those are two of the ones we definitely talk about. So we're going to talk about healer. And first things first, there is a misconception out there that is actually probably one of the biggest misconceptions I want to talk about. And it's actually in game. And I want to make sure you guys understand that this is an old from the beta, and somehow it made it to live. So healers do not remove vulnerable. That simply does not happen. So this is not true. Healers are not removing vulnerable, so be aware that this interaction isn't happening. So if you've chose healer based on that, hoping you were going to reduce the amount of damage that you're taking, it is not something that happens. So the only way to currently remove it is to have a striker, and we're getting into that because there's been a lot of discussion of why here. So so we got healer, and remember this we're going to talk about what active healing is, and active healing is basically any type of heal that's not. So it's always easier to describe what it's not. It's not drain. So like the symbiotes and Drax, it's not like the percent drain like Phoenix and Maw and Minerva, and it doesn't affect things like regen. So what it does affect is the flat healing states when you talk about active healing. So it is a additional percentage of the healing. So if it was a healing for 20,000, it would now be healing for 24,000. 20% of the actual healing stats. So it's not additive, it's multiplicative. So it's not taking, the heal and making it that much larger. However, what it does is applying minor regeneration. So on a character who takes a lot of turns or with a large health pool, this minor regeneration, this health could take a team to sustainability. The one thing I will tell you is we pictured teams when we made these selections in here, and we pictured them in their most prominent position. So like X-Force, we pictured them in war against their counters, the teams that they were countering. We pictured, Marauders on defense performing certain tasks. So hopefully we're going to get you to the point where you're going to theory craft these on your own based on the information we're providing here for you today. So another one, healer, we were using this specifically in U7.5 when we were supporting Yo-Yo and Black Bolt, and that is something that I think is still viable if you don't have the full team. And I know some people actually really enjoy using Yo-Yo, Black Bolt, Anti-Venom, Carnage, and Symbiote Spider-Man to much success. They actually work out pretty well. So we're going to talk about Raider, because Raider is probably the one of the easiest ones to talk about here. So surprisingly, when we did the math and we looked underneath the hood of how it was actually functioning, Raider is more damage than Striker when you figure in the fact that it is first, it's the second most effective way to apply the vulnerable stat. And remember, this applies it up to 3 stacks. So if you have a Raider, you're less likely to start taking stacks off of targets, especially if they're doing a multi-hit combo. Each hit does calculate differently. So things like Crystal, she's probably the best example of it, where each one of those attacks can apply, 3 stacks of it if they crit. But this actually at level 5 is more damage than Striker level 5, because the Striker bonus damage is applying directly to the base stats. So it's not a flat 20% damage additive like it is with the damage done on a target. So we broke down the map. You can take a look at it, the tier list in the comments over here, in the description over here. That is available to you guys. You can take a look at the math on the page that calls it out, and you'll see all the different numbers. And it was actually pretty interesting how it actually turned out. So let's talk about Striker. So how do you choose a Striker class? Now, Striker is actually probably one of my favorites, because it is actually one of those scenarios where there are so many options, so many ways to make this work, and a cool little interaction that we found out. So we're going to start with something that we'll call the Striker Skirmisher interaction. And so if the Striker attacks first and is assisted by a Skirmisher, after the main attack phase, the ISO attack phase will have the Striker get a 3rd attack in that cycle as an ISO attack. So it could be a lot of burst damage. So teams like Young Avengers with Miss Marvel as a Skirmisher, all of those characters can get a 3rd attack in that opening sequence with the ISO attack phase. So if they're, level 5 Strikers on all the other characters, they're getting those extra attacks. So it's exactly the opposite of the way we thought it would work, because I know a lot of people are like, well, wait a minute. How come with Skirmisher on Yo-Yo, Black Bolt isn't following up and doing that combo. The reverse is true. So if you took Yo-Yo and made her a striker and made Black Bolt a skirmisher, we tested it out, you would see that the interaction would happen and get a triple tap. So it's not as much damage because there isn't an effect on that. And we're going to talk about how to actually take a look at that. So in our sheet, we actually thank you to TJ and Pimptoxy for giving us the code so that we can integrate that into the sheet. So basically, we'll go to msf.gg, and this is how you know what the striker ability actually does. And so you have to look at this assist and counter info. And so what this is, so we'll use Venom as one of probably the biggest bonuses from this. So attack the primary target, flip 3 positive effects to negative effects. This is on his ISO attack. So it actually goes to 3 with the level 7 ice tier in it, so tier 4 mats in it. And so this is something that I think when you're looking at characters, you really want to see this effect happening. So when they do a bonus effect like, Black Bolt clearing 2 positive effects, it is very, very powerful. So you're also going to look for high damage, and so you'll see that break out basically at the tier 3 and tier 4 categories. So you want to look at that and kind of get an idea of how much damage potential it has. If you have a T4 in the basic, and this is something that was worrisome, is that T4s actually suddenly had more value if the character was a striker, because sometimes it was taking that damage scaling up another level to the point where it was almost invaluable. And especially with some of the characters when the T4 actually added some interesting stats or damage. To give you an idea, it would be a character like Anti-Venom. So Anti-Venom is something that's very interesting, and this is up to 1,000 of the opposite. It's just how they coded it. It isn't going to do that, but at level 6, it's only 66% damage applied bleed for 1 turn, 178% damage. So a significant damage increase. More importantly, it was just shocking. With the assist counter, that if he has 5 debuffs, he's going to apply the opposite of those 5 debuffs on the target. So pretty powerful. One of the best strikers in the game. So that's how we come up with those. So we talk about the striker, which is it's still good damage, and so characters that are have bleed mechanics are good striker candidates because it's going to be raw damage. Some of the way we thought about it was, if they didn't get a lot of attacks, or they were hitting a marked target frequently, or they just they were part of a combo where you had 3 to 4 skirmishers on the team, and we already knew that they were going to be applying enough debuff. So, because if a striker takes it off, that's 10% damage that the entire team isn't doing to a target. So that's where it happens. So it is such a really cool place to be able to theory craft in this game, where none of the same interactions are going to be happening every single time you fight it. So it's kind of interesting. And remember, some of what you guys are doing with your own teams are maybe more right than the stuff that we've talked about here. Again, this is a quick overview how to actually theory craft about your teams. Remember, striker, look for those extra abilities, look for extra bleeds. Remember that if you're using striker, that's the only way to remove vulnerable on a target. Raider can just, if it has an AoE attack, can just massively apply vulnerable to everybody. Then you can use multiple strikers. If it has a skirmisher and a striker interaction where they're assisting each other, remember, so think Hawkeye and Black Widow, think Proxima and Corvus. There are some specific scenarios you want to think about it, because they can start stripping multiple buffs. The other thing about it is Skirmisher actually becomes increasingly valuable when characters start interacting with each other. When 2 skirmishers start attacking a target and you have to get through a lot of buffs, it is just unique, because one skirmisher attacks, the next skirmisher attacks, and you're clearing 2 positive effects. So it's very, very good against characters who have buff stacked. You can start moving them quickly and getting through targets. I've been able to eliminate taunt and defense up on some characters. So again, we've done some advanced testing. We made some recommendations. If you guys have any more questions about the basics of this, please ask. But that is it right now. Remember, I do things so you guys don't have to. Yeah, that's a lot of ions. That's an awful lot of ions that were spent here. I love you guys much. Thanks for your support. If you guys like these videos, make sure you like and subscribe the content. RemanX. See you soon.